Hello and welcome back to another video in the Beyond the Hype series. In the last video, I talked about smart contracts, gave a bit of a technical intuition, and we walked through a real example of an escrow and how smart contracts can help facilitate transactions without having to trust a third party. This video, I want to continue down that line by giving a lot more real world examples about how smart contracts are used in practice, hopefully contextualizing the intuition that we developed in the last video. Okay, so in the first part of this video, I want to go through some of the examples that I think are good use cases of smart contracts. And in the second part of the video, I want to go through some examples that are interesting, but I don't see a prominent blockchain dimension to those use cases. And I think personally, those are not very good examples of how smart contracts should be used. Okay, so obviously you've heard of cryptocurrencies. Whether or not you think they really have value is something that I'll tackle in a separate video. But there's a lot of companies that use smart contracts to facilitate different kinds of payments on this cryptocurrency infrastructure. And so this means international transfers, micropayments, bulk payments, post-dated payments, all of that, smart contracts can do in an automated fashion nicely. And so that's something that a lot of companies, including CoinMe that I've written down here, have facilitated. Again, as long as cryptocurrencies can be exchanged for real money, right now, let's just assume that they have some value. And so the payment infrastructure overall for physical currencies is a big industry, and there's a lot of companies that are doing similar things in the crypto space. So there's just something that you consider. Alongside, there's also buying and selling of crypto and all of that exchange related works, and so there's a lot of smart contracts in place to do that. And so that's a whole part of the industry that I think is fairly obvious. So I won't go into much detail on that. But if you're interested, please leave in the comment below and I can answer specific questions about those. Another interesting example of smart contracts is actually by the government of India. So historically, land records in India have been very informally organized. The seller does not have to prove strongly that they actually own a piece of land before they sell it to someone. And so that creates a lot of disputes because two people think they both own the land, and then there's a whole selling chain that happened after that disagreement, and now it's like who actually owns the land. The government doesn't do a lot of due diligence in terms of checking if they're actually the owner. There's a lot of paper transactions that happen, and managing and organizing those paperworks are a challenge as usual. And so instead of this informal system, the government wanted to launch a digital system, but at the same time, they wanted it to be free of corruption. They didn't want to give the officials, power to change anything in a way that changes the history of a particular land record. And that's kind of particularly important in a country like India, where those problems are rampant. And so they came up with a system for a blockchain-based land registry system where all transactions and transfer of ownership are logged, and so anyone can track and verify that ownership chain of an asset. So this gives a general intuition about one way smart contracts can be used. It's that they can be paired with a physical asset, and every time the physical asset is transacted, you can also transact on the blockchain for the digital asset. And that way you can track the ownership and guarantee that the person who says they own something actually own that thing. And so that's a general use case that's not specific to land registry, that's motivated by this example. Another interesting use case I saw recently was that McMaster University started issuing digital diplomas. And so typically, if you wanted to verify if someone went to university, you would have to call the university office and they'll have to give all the information. You might have to pay a small fee, and then they'll come back and say, yes, they went to this university and this degree is valid, or if it's not. So McMaster issued this on the blockchain, where anyone can now go on the blockchain and verify a degree by itself. So essentially, it's like a certificate that they sign and they provide to others to verify. Now, this doesn't strictly require the blockchain because they could also just do it from their website. Except the twist is that now you don't need to trust McMaster that they'll lose all that information someday. So what if McMaster has all of these degrees in a database, and what if it's wiped clean due to whatever reason? And so this kind of, if it's on the blockchain, it's for anyone to verify without depending on McMaster. They don't have to be online. They don't have to even have a database to maintain track of all of this. Once it's signed and it's out there on the blockchain, and you can verify, oh, this is actually McMaster who signed this, they can guarantee the authenticity of the certificates. You also don't need to trust that McMaster won't just revoke your degree for whatever reason tomorrow. And so once it's issued, if the smart contract is properly configured, you can guarantee that your degree will stay with you for the rest of your life or whatever. So I think that's also an interesting example, and the general use case there is, issuing certificates is something that people want to do for their clients, for the end consumers, often, especially if they have middlemen who might change the product in certain ways. So this is another good example. Another general use case is voting. And so Polis Vote is just one of many companies who are doing blockchain-based voting platforms. But in general, say if you are participating in a ballot, you would write down your vote, and at the end of the voting period, a third party, hopefully they're impartial, will go ahead and count all of the votes and declare a winner. Now, again, that is problematic because you need to trust that that third party is actually impartial. You need to trust that there is no mistake being made. If it's a software system, you still need to ensure that nobody can go in and manipulate the database. And so you want it to be immutable. So we already seen that smart contracts have a predefined set of rules, and you can guarantee that they're being followed. And so that's a great application for voting applications where you need to trust, each other, and you can verify that everyone voted for this person, and that's why they were elected. It's not being rigged. So that's an interesting application again, and this is just some general use cases. And so one good example which applies some of these ideas that we've talked about is Decentraland. It is a metaverse. It does use cryptocurrencies as a form of game currency. So that's pretty standard. But it also uses this voting principle and voting based smart contracts for what is called a DAO. And it's a decentralized governance body, essentially, where the people who use the metaverse, the gamers themselves, they vote for what they want changed in the metaverse, and they have a say. And instead of the owner of or the creator of the metaverse deciding what they do, they give the users the power and the freedom to make those decisions, and it's transparent to everyone, and so they can guarantee and they can verify the transactions that they thought were going through, or the changes on the metaverse that they thought were going through were actually voted for by the majority. So that's again a good use case in general, which is decentralized governance, and it kind of gives you some more power to make systems democratic when you have no option but to trust a third party to make it democratic. And so that's very, very interesting to me personally. Another example is Graphite Docs. Now, this is actually a failed startup, but it failed not because of its technology. It failed because of its business model. Essentially, the idea is this: say, you probably use Google Drive or Dropbox or OneDrive or something like that to host all of your, important documents. You might fear that what if suddenly Google loses all of your data, or Microsoft loses all of your data for no apparent reason? What if they just all of the data gets deleted, or somebody hacks them, or whatever? Now, these days, the chances of that happening are very low because Google itself now distributes your data across the world. They make many copies of your data so that they're not lost. But using the blockchain for distributing your important files, and you encrypt it and all of that, so you ensure that it's not being tampered with, or if it's not, you ensure privacy. But by distributing your files, you can ensure that they're not just in one or two or even 100 computers, they're in thousands of computers stored securely, so that your data is with you all the time. And so that's again an interesting idea. I don't think it has many practical applications now, in particularly the file space. But there's a lot of other things where you don't need to trust. You don't want to trust a cloud provider for your most important recipe, for example. By storing it on a blockchain in an encrypted fashion, you ensure that a lot of computers retain some copies of the data at a small cost. And so that's an interesting example. The last of the good examples that I wanted to get into was the Medi Ledger network. Essentially, it's trying to maintain the supply chain of the healthcare industry on the blockchain. And it's interesting to me because of this. So, in general, say you have an industry where you want a bunch of companies to collaborate and share some data. So you would maybe build some software system that'll enable that collaboration. But who will own the infrastructure? Who will manage the database? Who will have access to the cloud service provider to go ahead and change and tweak any settings? So typically, to solve this problem in the real world, what people do is they'll create a third entity, which will essentially be like a committee of sorts with representatives from all of the individual companies, and they'll vote on decisions, and then they'll own the infrastructure in a joint manner that'll avoid disputes and misuse and all of that. But the blockchain technology can solve some of those problems by giving an infrastructure that is democratic, that is not owned by one person, and the rules of the smart contracts are transparent. And so you get all of that formality for free. You don't need to trust any one player. In a collaboration, you can collaborate more freely. So that is something the Medi Ledger network tries to do. Again, it's trying to issue some kind of certificates at each stage in the pipeline. So the manufacturer of, say, certain medicines can say, yes, I manufactured it, this is the expiry date, these are the ingredients, its origin is this. And that way, as an end consumer, you can verify that, oh, this token that came with the medicine shows that this doesn't expire until 2 years, so I can trust that. Now, this is not to say that there won't be people who are like, oh, here, I'll sell you the medicines without the token at a lower price, and then I'll sell fake medicines to people with the token. And so, that certificate laundering process might still happen. But at least now, there's some physical value associated with the guarantee that this medicine is from the particular manufacturer, which might reduce misuse, because now you can only, you have two things that you can distribute: either it's the real medicine or the token and the medicine. So you can't make infinite copies of medicine, fake medicine, and give that to people and assume that they'll all just take it, assuming it's the real entity. Also makes tampering, the expiry dates and all of that a lot less frequent. So overall, there's some advantages. It's not a perfect system. It does just increase the cost of doing bad things. It doesn't completely eliminate it. But I personally find it interesting because it offers a good way of collaboration between certain entities without having to trust a single entity to manage all of that infrastructure. So I think that's a useful takeaway from this example. Okay. Now I want to go into some examples that I think are interesting but are not really, there's no strong blockchain dimension, or if they're just they don't make sense to me. So the first example is PledgeCamp. It's kind of a Kickstarter kind of a platform on the blockchain, and the premise is interesting. What they're trying to do is, if you're on Kickstarter, you give creators some money. How do you ensure that they actually, follow through on that? And so they combine the voting thing that we talked about before, and kind of make this a more standardized process where the creators only get the money after the backers vote on a milestone and they agree that they've met the milestone, so they can split the payments in a plan. Now, in practice, I don't think this pans out as nicely. So, for example, there's less KYC, so who knows what the creators will do. The escrow thing works fine, but creators can also create a lot of fake accounts to fund partially in this campaign, so that they still retain a lot of the voting rights. And so, for example, I want to raise $100,000. I will go on this platform and I'll say, actually, I want to raise $200,000. I'll get $100,000 of my own money and fund it, and I'll just get that money back because it's coming to me. But now I own 50% of the stake in this investment, and so I can have all the voting rights and I can call the shots. And the backers don't even know that it's me, because I can create many crypto wallets and fund it through this. So in a way that the anonymity doesn't quite work for this platform, I think there's edge cases, and I don't know how they're handling this in practice. But the premise is interesting. I mean, I see the value in what it's trying to do. It just I think in some cases having a single entity like Kickstarter who you trust can be an asset, because they can do more KYC, background checks, all of that hard work in the physical world to connect the digital with something that's more grounded. So I think that's where this example falls short. Another interesting example was a company called Genesis of Things. What they were trying to do is, say you have you're a design company, you've designed a product and you have the CAD file for it that you want to send someone to 3D print. But this is your intellectual property, and what if whoever you're sending it to just makes copies of this file, and then they can print infinite amounts of it using their 3D printer without even telling you. And so this company finds a way to encrypt this file and make it kind of the transactions on this blockchain, and so you have the file ownership per use, and you pay for it per use, and then you return the file back digitally this platform. Now, personally, I think it's an interesting idea, but without special hardware, how do you guarantee that that this file is just not in memory for people to copy and hack? But with special hardware, if this company was also making their own 3D printers, which I don't know if they are, and if they have hardware locks and protections in place to ensure that this file is not open to read, and if it's not hackable, then they can ensure that yes, the creators get paid per use of this CAD file without having to go through extreme measures to protect their intellectual property. So I think this is again interesting. I couldn't find much about this about how they're doing this to guarantee if they have specialized hardware. But in the event that they do, I think it's actually a good use case and not so much of a questionable use case. You might have heard a lot about decentralized finance or DeFi. I think again it's interesting. So think of what if you want to take a loan in the real world? You would go and say, "Oh, I have a house. I can use it as collateral, and then I can take $100,000 of loans on top of that." Why are you using your house as a collateral? Because you think as an asset it'll go up over time, so you don't want to sell it right away. It might not even be too liquid that you can find a seller and then buy it back, or you might need it for something else. So you say, "Oh, keep the house. In the meantime, I'll take this loan. I'll do something with it, and then when I return it, you can give me the house back." That's kind of the general concept. People are doing that with cryptocurrencies. So essentially, you can say, "I have 100 Bitcoin. I think it'll go up in time, and so I don't want to sell it right now. Keep it. Instead, I'll take the equivalent in USD. I'll do something with the US dollars, and then when I'm done with that money, I'll return it with interest, and I'll get my 100 Bitcoin back." So overall, you see this is kind of an interesting example, except that cryptocurrencies are like physical currencies in the sense that they're liquid. They don't it's easy to sell them, so why wouldn't you just sell the cryptocurrency today, buy it back when you don't need the money anymore? Why would you pay interest on US dollars? And the answer might be that you're expecting the Bitcoin to appreciate significantly more. You want it as an investment, so you want to keep it as it is. But there's a lot of risks that come up in this case. So because cryptocurrencies are really volatile, you often need to put in maybe two times of what you're taking as loan. So to borrow $100, you need to put in $200 worth of Bitcoin. If you had that kind of a money, again, why wouldn't you just use it directly? And then if say the Bitcoin price falls dramatically, the smart contracts have automatic circuits that sell the Bitcoin on your behalf without even consulting you, and give just to protect the lenders. So this actually led to a huge crash of cryptocurrencies recently, where the Terra Luna currency, the coin, kind of crashed because of just natural volatility, and a lot of circuits in the smart contracts got triggered, and a lot of them started to dump the cryptocurrencies automatically on a algorithm, because that's how smart contracts work. Their rules got triggered. They started selling. Everyone started to dump this coin, and all of a sudden, the coin kept crashing more and more, and the lower it went, the more smart contracts got triggered, and it was a whole 2008 kind of a crisis in the crypto lending industry. So I think it makes sense in some cases, but more so than not, if I personally don't see crypto as that strong of an investment asset. As I mean, you could invest in say US dollars as someone living in India, and that's some kind of an investment. But most people won't use it for full-time investment. It is just like a currency. It's supposed to be liquid. It's supposed to be something that you use every day. And if it's something like that, why wouldn't you just sell it instead of taking loans at exorbitant rates and then getting the risk of this crypto being sold automatically on your behalf because of market variations? So I think overall it's interesting, but does not make too much sense to me. There's another company called Voice, which is trying to do a blockchain based social media platform. Again, it doesn't totally make sense to me. I think there's a lot of value added services that social media companies provide on top of that, and without the data being organized in a certain way, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Also, the volume of data is so big that it's probably not the most efficient to store this on the blockchain. And finally, there's alternatives that are end-to-end encrypted, like Telegram. So if all you care about is privacy, why wouldn't you just use a system like that? So again, I think that's where this system kind of falls apart for me, and that's why I'm out. Another example of a blockchain technology that does not make a lot of sense to me is this community points kind of an algorithm. Now, here again, I get the idea. I think it's interesting. But why wouldn't you just create a normal app that does this instead of a blockchain based app? This is not something that is mission critical. People don't care that much about transparency when it comes to this. And again, the cost of hosting all of this on the blockchain might just not be feasible or even make sense. So personally, I would say, again, this is something that should not be a blockchain solution, but just a regular solution. It doesn't need to be sold as a smart contract per se. There's also a lot of advertising companies that are using blockchain for buying and selling ads. I think where this falls apart is that ultimately there has to be some connection with the physical world. And so you might show an ad on a particular site, and that site is off chain, it is not part of the blockchain. And how do you track within the smart contract if a particular ad was seen or not, and how to disperse payments to the publisher based on that? So I think there's still need for trust, and it just doesn't make sense that this would be on the blockchain. I think it could be achieved much better in a much more robust system without the blockchain. That's how most of the advertising industry works today. So I think, again, this just personally to me doesn't make a lot of sense. The final example that I wanted to get into was Park Gene, which uses blockchain for parking spots. Again, personally, there's no need for decentralization of this data. I think people are fine using a service like Uber, for example, for ride sharing. I don't see an avenue where people would find it easier if things were on a blockchain. You also need to understand that there's a certain friction on using the blockchain. You often need to have a crypto wallet. You need to go through all the hoops. Why does it make sense to go through all of that just for parking spots when you could just download an app that does that exact same thing? So again, I personally don't see a strong blockchain dimension to this problem. I think smart contracts are not strictly required to get parking spots, and so I think this again is not a good example. So that was my last example. Hopefully, this gives you a lot more intuition and context about what some of the good use cases of blockchain technology are. And again, um, some of these things are really hard to achieve without technology like the blockchain technology. So I think that's interesting. I think you also saw some ideas where there's just no strong blockchain dimension to the problem, and so there doesn't make sense to just apply smart contracts for the fun of it. But in the next video, I want to get into cryptocurrencies and whether they have real value. I think there's a lot of debate about that, especially given how volatile cryptocurrencies are. A lot of famous names like Mark Cuban and Warren Buffett have said that they wouldn't buy cryptocurrencies at all for any reason. So in the next video, I want to go through some arguments about why cryptocurrencies might have some real value, and also counter arguments, and give my opinion, my 2 cents about cryptocurrencies. All right. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Please do like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that usual stuff, and let me know what you think. Bye.